I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction. Wanna bet?
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
CJ, Patrick Kane has turned himself into the most fascinating name at the trade deadline. And I get it, off name only, he should be. But his last 4 games, 7 goals, 10 points. And that includes a buzzer beater that was robbed from him the other night against Vegas. What a story.
Yeah, I mean, we can no longer say he's having his least productive season either, just because this hot week has actually gotten his numbers back to, you know, not fully where we're used to seeing them, but well on the way there to being almost a point per game player. And this one's going to overtime. I think what's really interesting to me is that we're recording this the afternoon of Thursday, February 23rd. And by now we expected to have clarity on Patrick Kane's intentions. I think that all along was you know, his hope, his agent's hope, Chicago management's hope. And you know, I don't sense anything negative, the fact that he hasn't made up his mind, but I think it's quite notable and shows maybe the weight of the decision that he's facing, that he's had this amazing week, which I refuse to believe is a coincidence, by the way. I think we're looking at a pretty proud athlete, a gamer, someone who's brought it. And, you know, now he's working through what he's going to do, and he's passing his own deadlines. And so, you know, ultimately, I think what's going to get delivered is one team likely to Chicago management that he's willing to waive for, if he is ultimately willing to waive. And so perhaps it's a straightforward process from there. But, you know, as the Blackhawks head out to California for, you know, a couple games this weekend, you know, we're still on Patrick Kane watch.
Even though that one team that Patrick Kane wants to go for is still out there, and that being the New York Rangers, have you heard from, you know, just in talking to other people, if any other teams have just kind of taken notice of Patrick's play, if that matters at all?
Well, there's certainly a number of teams I think that are interested here. You know, the Oilers have continued to monitor the situation. You know, I think the Dallas Stars have a natural fit. You know, they've run into some goal scoring troubles in Dallas of late. The team struggled a little bit. They've been looking for a forward all year long. I think that Patrick Kane fills an obvious need for them. You know, the Carolina Hurricanes are thought to be on the periphery here. And there may be others, you know, but ultimately this is the crazy thing is we can, you know, speculate or discuss all this interest, but ultimately it comes down to what Patrick himself wants. And, you know, I would think the Rangers are the most appealing, the fact that they at least appear to have the door open, but, you know, they have to do some work to make this kind of trade work just financially. Even with Patrick Kane's contract at 25% of its value filtered through another team, even if, you know, Vitaly Kravtsov goes the other way, which, you know, I think would be part of the return, given that Kravtsov has not been happy with his opportunity with the Rangers, has requested a trade from that team. You know, there's still more cap machinations that would have to go into this. There's a way to make it work, but the point is it's not necessarily easy for New York. And I think if you're any of those other sort of teams I mentioned, and Pat Brisson, the agent for Patrick Kane, comes to you, or he goes to Kyle Davidson, the, you know, Blackhawks general manager, and says, hey, Patrick's interested in coming there, I think anyone would jump through those hoops to make it happen. And this becomes so much more dramatic because of what we've seen in the last week. And it seems almost crazy to say that about a player that's played, you know, nearly 1,300 NHL games to this point, that something he does in any 4-game stretch changes the complexion. But I just think that there was so much conjecture about his hip injury, about his level of engagement, you know, just wondering if all the losing and being on the team he's been on this year had sort of made him a lesser version of himself. And, you know, I talked to someone today that has been at a couple of the recent games Kane has played, and he said the guy's scoring at will now. Like, he's like, it's uncanny. And, you know, we just know him to be that type of player. I feel like if you're a playoff team and he wants to come to you, you find a way to make it work. You find a way to have your roster bend in his direction rather than the other way around. And so, you know, I don't know if it's going to be on Friday. I think it's possible we get an answer Friday. If not, you know, they play Saturday in San Jose. So, you know, we really are at the very end here, I think, in terms of, you know, Patrick Kane having to signal one way or another which way he's going. But, everybody waits. Chicago front office is waiting, and all those teams that may or may not be able to make this deal are waiting. Well, Patrick Kane weighs a pretty big decision for him and his family.
In terms of, I know we were kind of talking about it with regards to mentioning Vitaly Kravtsov. What exactly is the ask for Patrick Kane from the Blackhawks?
Well, they haven't really got around to asking yet because they haven't been able to shop him. I think the fact that it's likely to be one team, if there's any team at all, really hinders what the Blackhawks can get in a trade here. Maybe you're talking a second round pick and a prospect. I think that's what when we're talking about what makes sense, if it ends up being a team like Dallas, Dallas has so many for a top team, they've got a really nice prospect pool. I think they'd be willing to give up a second round pick. I think that there's a lot of interest from the Stars end to make this happen, but they can't really go too far down that road until they find out what Patrick Kane wants. But it wouldn't surprise me if we end up saying this deal doesn't include a first rounder. Just because it's not a true negotiation. There's not a lot of leveraging that can be done in this case. Some of the teams that might be in these talks, the Rangers, for example, even if it ends up being the Rangers, they now have just their own first round pick. I don't think they want to give that up in 2023. Maybe they can be coerced to give up a future first rounder, 24 or 25. But, I'm not sure that Chicago is going to be, having enough leverage to get that yet. So, if the trade goes down here, I think maybe casual fans or people not tuned into the situation might be surprised by the return. You might say, hey, wait, in what world is Tarasenko worth more as a rental, or, Bo Horvat? But, I just think the circumstances are a little bit different in this case where you have a player really dictating where he goes himself. And so, we'll see where that winds up. But I think something like a second and a prospect is sort of loosely what I've heard. I just don't know that Chicago can even really be going too far down that road until they get an indication from Patrick Kane he's willing to be moved.
Siege, we have a lot to get to today. We have to talk about Luke Schenn. Brock Boeser is going to come up. Brad Treliving is going to come up, among some other stuff in our headline segment. And of course, we have to get to sports interaction. So before we move on, is there anything else you want to mention about Patrick Kane?
Stay tuned.
Oh, that's what we call in this business a tease, sir. Let's get to sports interaction, and you can bet that.
You can bet that with David Bastel. Brought to you by Sports Interaction. Get in the action and make a play. 19 plus. Please play responsibly.
Welcome to You Can Bet That. Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. We've talked a lot about trades. We're going to talk a lot about trades. Let's talk about Connor Bedard for just a brief moment. Just wanted to refresh everyone on the Connor Bedard sweepstakes. Sports Interaction has Chicago as the betting favorite, not too far behind, though. Anaheim, Columbus is in third. Arizona and San Jose round out the top five. Vancouver and Montreal, the top two Canadian teams, both in sixth and seventh best odds in the Connor Bedard sweepstakes. That is according to Sports Interaction. Siege, how do you think it stacks up?
Well, man, 6 points for Bedard on Wednesday night. Like, this guy is a video game numbers being put up in the Western Hockey League. And it's been kind of interesting in the bail hard for Bedard sweepstakes. Arizona has been hot of late. Chicago, riding Patrick Kane's heroics, has been winning more games. Anaheim, actually, as we're recording this, has fallen into that final spot. And so, look, we don't know how the lottery balls are going to bounce, but certainly I think there'll be more focus here in the next 6 weeks about which team ends up with the best odds, because that's all you can do if you're a franchise at this point in time. And we recognize the players aren't thinking that way that have to play the games, but it's hard to imagine the front offices of these teams, their scouting departments, amateur scouts aren't watching what Bedard is doing and just hoping and praying he falls into their orbit, because I think really since the World Juniors he's separated himself with how he's performed and the number he's putting up. And this is a special talent, and he changes the complexion for any of those 7 teams you just mentioned.
Philadelphia, St. Louis, Ottawa, Washington, and Detroit round up the rest of the teams whose shots at Connor Bedard range from plus 1,000 to 2,100. So still some teams definitely in the running, but some chances a lot better for the first few teams I mentioned than the others. Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all the best odds, before game, in-game, best props, sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Athletic Greens. I gave AG1 a try because I wanted better gut health, sustained energy, a better immune system. Really, just between you and me, man, like taking pills and vitamins every single day gets very annoying. I like the idea of just taking a little powder, put it in my water. You know, we talk about mixing in waters here on the CJ Show. So why not do that and add in some AG1 while we are at it? It's just, again, the idea that, like, you know, we can help with sustaining energy, better immune system, better gut health as well. I like that personally, as someone who, you know, is trying to do a little bit better by my body nowadays. You know what I'm saying? It's good to have that going. All great athletes have one thing in common: they take care of their bodies. I'm not an athlete. I wish I was an athlete, but still, you know, it'd be nice to think of myself as one day. Probably never. It doesn't matter, because AG1 will help you get those vitamins in, just like what athletes would try to do. And they have 75 high quality ingredients that give daily nutrients and long-term gut health support. It's a micro habit that delivers macro benefits and helps almost everybody take great care of their health. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/Johnston. That's athleticgreens.com/Johnston and check it out. A free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is go to athleticgreens.com/Johnston. Check it out. Couple nights ago, we noticed the Vancouver Canucks were holding Luke Schenn out of the lineup. Thomas Drance from The Athletic confirmed that it is, in fact, for trade-related reasons. I think Patrick Johnston of The Province as well is saying the same thing. Yeah, we're trying to figure out where this guy could go. Cheap defenseman, could be a team's number 6, has won those cups in Tampa Bay. Does a reunion to Toronto make sense for Luke Schenn? What do you think?
Well, for starters, I think Luke Schenn himself would like to know where he's going to go. Thought he was going to play in that game in Nashville on Tuesday, was approached during the day by Patrick Allvin, the Canucks general manager, and informed he wasn't going to play between now and March 3rd for the trade related reasons. And, at that point he requested to fly back to Vancouver. His wife is in the late stages of a pregnancy. And so if he wasn't going to play, he didn't want to stay on the road with the team, waiting for more clarity there. And, so he's now back in Vancouver. I think he doesn't really know what's going to happen, and he's just skating on his own. Here's the thing with Schenn. I do think he is on the list of places or people that the Leafs have interest in. And really, when we look at Toronto's next move after the O'Reilly-Achari deal, I do expect them to try pretty hard here to make an upgrade on their blue line. But, it's such a big potential market here for defensemen. I mean, we're seeing new teams like Washington and St. Louis enter the picture in the last week or so with some defensemen on the market. Plus you have all the names that we've been talking about for months, whether it's Jake McCabe, Gavrikov. I mean, you go down the list, there's a lot of potential defensemen available out there. I mean, even the Nashville guys, is Matthias Ekholm, a movable piece? Is that something that could fit for the Leafs? And so I think the Leafs are at a point where they're going to survey the market in this last week and a bit before the deadline, and then make a decision. I think Luke Schenn is certainly on their radar. He would come at a cost on the cap that they can easily accommodate. The acquisition cost, I think, has scared some teams off. Tampa, for example, was definitely interested in Schenn, having won those 2 cups with him, knowing what he's all about and how he fit in then. I just don't see them giving up a 3rd-round pick or maybe even a 2nd-round pick to get him. And so, they've backed off. And so, Luke Schenn is just the latest guy in limbo. It's amazing, these 3 players with Vladislav Gavrikov in Columbus and Jacob Chigger in Arizona. There's a possibility none of them are moved. I mean, I think it's likely they're going to be moved, but when you hold a player out and and now it gets into weeks in the multiple weeks in the case of Gavrikov and Chychrun without a trade. I think that there's some frustration building up to some degree about, what's going to happen here. I saw Bill Armstrong, the Coyotes general manager, did an interview with Craig Morgan where he acknowledged, maybe they don't move Chychrun at all by the deadline. You would think Gavrikov and Schenn are moved both because they're rental players are in a different situation than Chychrun. But this rumored deal to Boston for Gavrikov, you just wonder, is it going to happen? It's kind of been hanging there on the vine for quite some time now. And it's kind of strange. I think with Schenn, it's quite possible we're not talking until March 2nd or 3rd about where he's going. And, if it gets to that point and the Leafs haven't been able to find something else that makes sense, it would not completely surprise me to see them pull the trigger and, be kind of a bookend story. The former 5th overall pick by Toronto way back when. Early in my career, the first entry draft I ever went to was in Ottawa in 2008, and Luke Schenn was the 5th overall pick by the Leafs. And so, not to make it about me, but I'm just saying it's been that long ago, nearly 900 and whatever games Luke's played. He might find himself back in Toronto, but I do think there certainly are other contenders keeping tabs there, especially if the price goes down a little bit. I think that's what a lot of teams are waiting for.
Who in Toronto is most likely, if Luke Schenn were to go to Toronto, to use the headline, "The Prodigal Son Returns"?
The Sun, I would think.
I do it.
They might do more of a punny one, like "Good Luke" or "Good Luck." I know I'm trying to think of something but I look at it would be a story that would be feel good. It makes sense to me to some degree. I know there's a little debate out there. I mean, look, what the Leafs need, like whatever D they get, I'm willing to admit, or I'm willing to sort of bet or wager that it's going to be someone who has a little bit of a physical component to them. I think that that's still something they're missing heading into the playoffs, is just a little bit more edge back there. We can look at, how certain players move the puck and this and that. And the Leafs have lots of good puck moving defensemen. Frankly, that's a strength of their team. I think that there's room to add a little bit of another element, even if, perhaps if it's someone like Luke Schenn, you're not even acquiring him with the mind of playing him in every game in the playoffs. I mean, if you look at Tampa's cup runs, both of them, he was a scratch at times. He played in the big games. He had a fight in a conference final, I believe, in the bubble. But would maybe just bring an element that they need. Now, there's other players out there that might do the same. I mean, Ekholm, I mentioned in Nashville, that to me is an ideal type of fit for the Leafs. I just don't know how you fit the cap in, right? It's a $6.25 million contract with 3 more years on it. But I mean, when you're talking about purely trying to replace Jake Muzzin, that is a player that ticks all the boxes, can play mean, box out in front of the net. I think that's the ideal type of guy, but I just don't know. First of all, the ask from Nashville, from what I heard, might be as much as 2 first-round picks for him, for teams making that call. It's sort of similar to the Jacob Chychrun situation. If teams really like him, I know he's an older player, so that's what's different from Chychrun, but you're buying him for multiple years. I just don't see that Toronto could make that work, but let's see where the prices go in the next week. Like we're finally at the point where the real negotiations are mostly going on, right? It's no longer just ask a crazy price and then put in a really low offer if you're a team trying to buy. Now everyone has to start moving in the direction. And so, the Leafs are keeping their cards pretty close to the vest, but I do think that they're going to be in the market for a defenseman here. And to answer your original point, I think Schenn's on the radar if they can't get something bigger done.
Okay. What about his current Canucks teammate, Brock Boeser? What's the market looking like for him right now?
Well, the Canucks are trying to move Boeser. And, I know that they've maybe made some public remarks to the contrary. But behind the scenes, the word I'm getting from other teams is that they've been pretty aggressive in, seeking out a market for him. I think that they've made no secret of the fact they're looking to, try to remove some money from their payroll, free up their cap to make other moves moving forward. And, in Brock Boeser's case, I think it's time where he's open to, his own sort of fresh start. It makes so much sense for him to be in Minnesota, except for the fact that Wild they're really cap strapped the next 2 years. That's where they're feeling most of the pain from the buyouts that they executed on Ryan Suter and Zach Parise. So I don't see how that works unless Vancouver's retaining some money or taking some kind of contract back, something to make the dollars and cents match up. But keep an eye on that situation. It's still a possibility, I would say. A few other teams like Boeser as well, but at, just a shade under 7 million, it's a big one to endeavor. So I think the Canucks are going to make a real concerted effort here in the last week before the deadline to explore those markets and find somewhere for him, because I do think that they would like a fresh start for him. He's played well since Rick Tocchet took over, getting more favorable minutes, playing alongside Pettersson a fair bit, and put up some points, and so there's going to be a push, I think, in this next week to get him moved.
But one team I thought maybe not necessarily that they would get him, but I know a couple months ago the idea had been floated around that potentially the Calgary Flames would be in on Brock Boeser. I thought I had seen some reports on that. Obviously, just it feels as if with their situation in flux every day with how this team looks, we don't really know what they're going to be doing at the deadline. Actually, earlier this week, Brad Treliving spoke with a fellow colleague, Wes Gilbertson of Post Media, and said he hasn't given much thought to moving a first-round pick, while also mentioning that, hey, we'll have to wait and see with what's going to happen with them at the deadline. What do you think about Brad Treliving's comments and what they could be doing at the trade deadline next week?
Well, the word I've heard around the Flames is just don't expect a buying spree. It's a funny line to walk, because obviously they're right on the edges of the playoff picture at this point in time. I don't see that drastically changing in a positive or negative direction. There just aren't enough games left between now and March 3rd to really swing it where it looks like they're definitely out of it or definitely in it. And so, you want the playoff gates. Any owner in the league does. I think clearly they're built to be a playoff team, even if they haven't performed up to the level everyone expected. I mean, if you get in, you just always hope maybe something will come together. Maybe, playoff Nazem Kadri takes over, or some of the things that have impeded their success so far as a team, those barriers come down when everyone's pulling the same direction, trying to win a Stanley Cup. And so, I think that they will probably add, I would expect that they're going to add at forward at minimum. I could still see them getting a forward and a defenseman. I just don't see them playing in the splashy pools. I don't think that they're going to give you a big headline to write about Julian between now and March 3rd, just because the team hasn't really warranted it, right? They don't look like they're one big move away from going on a crazy run. It's not to say it can't happen. I mean, stranger things have happened. Daryl Sutter has coached a team that was the 8th seed in the Western Conference that won a Stanley Cup. It's happened before. But at this point in time, I think that they're still want to get in the playoffs. Brad Treliving and his front office want to help the team get there with whatever ways they can. Just seems to me they're shopping in the bargain aisle more than the big splash zone at this point in time.
Yeah, that's my sense of it. Like, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Brad Treliving shopped for a forward who's like a middle six guy or a bottom six forward, and maybe you're able to plug him into that middle second or third line whenever need be, because he's been seeking a top 9 forward pretty much since training camp. So that pretty much falls in line with what I've either heard or also just my sense of things in talking to him and also just other people around the organization. Anyway, we've gone through the Leafs, we've gone through Boeser, we've gone through Brad Treliving. What about Dmitry Orlov in Washington?
This is an interesting one because, Washington, for me, like if you go call up their cap situation, they've got one NHL defenseman signed next year. It's John Carlson. Obviously some of those players are, they have restricted free agents to consider and to possibly extend. But they don't have a lot of guarantees. And Dmitry Orlov plays 23 minutes a night for this team. He's been a top pairing defenseman. And on top of that, this is not a look ahead to the UFA class. This is not a year where it's going to be easy to get a top end defenseman. I mean, you have players potentially like Orlov, Matt Dumba, John Klingberg. It's not what I would class, Gavrikov. We'll see if he signs an extension, if he's dealt. It's not a big pool of UFAs. And so if you're Washington, you wonder, how do you move on from this guy? But here we are 8 days from the deadline, and it does not seem like there's been much progress made towards getting him signed to a contract. It sounds as though they've maybe started at least engaging on, 5 and 6 year terms on a potential extension, which, is an improvement because there had been, in my understanding, a pretty big gap in the term the player wanted and what the team was willing to extend until, earlier this week. And so this is going to maybe go down to the wire. It could be a game of chicken, because I think it makes a lot of sense for Washington to retain a player that's had a lot of success there that I think by and large would stay as long as the money and the contract was right. And I see a team that has Alex Ovechkin, wants to remain competitive in the years that Ovechkin has left. And I don't know if it's all going to line up just right. And so in the midst of this, Julian, I've started to hear Orlov's name out there in trade chatter. Certainly teams are looking at him. The Capitals by no means have ruled out trying to sign him and trying to find a way to make this work. But, this is one that, with a week left, like, can they even risk, keeping him? Because, Washington's fallen further and further out of the, they're fading kind of from the wild card chase in the Eastern Conference. They've had tons of injuries and the like. And, it's a pretty good player at a time when they don't have a lot of security at that position. So, I mean, it's flexibility in their cap picture is one way to look at it, but it's also, if not Orlov, who are they going to, play next year as they, this year has been a disappointment, but I think that there's some mitigating circumstances as to why they are where they are. I think if you're them, you could expect to be healthier next year, maybe make a few moves and refresh things a little bit and come back with hope for next year. But, right now they don't have a lot of certainty on that blue line. And, it's not just Orlov. I mean, they have Nick Jensen, who's a pending UFA, who's, someone whose name's out on the trade market. They have a Trevor Van Riemsdyk, who's a pending UFA. I think that there's a chance they actually keep him. I think there's been some overtures about trying to sign him. Eric Gustafson's a pending UFA. I think there's been overtures to try to sign him, but they got a lot of balls in the air, I guess we'll put it. And none of them are more important than the discussions with Orlov in his camp.
You mentioned Trevor Van Riemsdyk. How about his brother James, who plays for the Philadelphia Flyers? What about him? What could be his future destination at the trade deadline, if he moves at all?
Well, there's strong interest in him, and I do expect him to move now. I mean, there was a time talking about James Van Riemsdyk. I just wondered, with a $7 million cap hit and the league being such as it is, would that be a movable contract? But it sounds like there's 5 or 6 teams anyway that are keeping pretty close tabs on him. The Flyers are willing to retain salary in a trade. And so I do think he'll be moved. And, one of the interesting things to me is that there's a lot of crossover here with the teams interested in Timo Meier that are, just keeping him as sort of a, secondary item that, someone they could pivot to if they don't, hit on Meier, teams like Winnipeg, Carolina, even Vegas, I think, has some interest in James Van Riemsdyk. And so, there's that. Plus, I think Minnesota has looked at him. I wonder about Colorado as well as a potential destination. And so, there was a point in the season I wondered, where he'd be at when we got to the deadline. Well, now it seems that all signs are pointing towards him being moved and potentially to one of the big contenders. I mean, it probably happens after the Meier domino falls. It still seems like Timo Meier's future will be determined before we get to March 3rd. I think San Jose will, have figured out, what's going to become of him by then. And then, some of those teams that whoever doesn't get him, whether it's Carolina or New Jersey or Vegas or Winnipeg, those teams are going to have to look elsewhere to try to augment their forward groups if they don't land the biggest fish.
What about teams ahead of the deadline who have, a lot of cap space available to them? I like the term you used in our little rundown before the show called banker teams. And obviously a team that comes to mind is a team like Arizona. And obviously the trade that they made with Vegas yesterday for Shea Weber, obviously coming into mind with how they're able to use their cap space and take on contracts. And yeah, I know there's a situation they're trying to get to the cap floor, but what about more of these so-called banker teams? How could they play a role ahead of the deadline?
Well, they're popular right now. And, depending who you talk to, it sounds like there's anywhere from 3 to 5 of them out there, that have sort of let it be known they're willing to be part of deals as needed. And let's face it, look at all the trades that have made, all the big name players, some contract was retained. We saw in the case of the Ryan O'Reilly deal to Toronto, Minnesota, was a third party banker in that case and got a 4th round pick for taking on about $75,000 in actual money plus the cap hit for Ryan O'Reilly on his way to Toronto. Even that Shea Weber gets his contract out to Arizona. We see Nikita Zaitsev basically get his contract. There's a player attached to it too, dealt to Chicago as Ottawa clears out space. I mean, you're seeing this as such a trend around the league. And, one team I'd say to keep an eye on is I think the Montreal Canadiens. We talked about them in our last episode. I don't know how much selling they're going to be able to do. They're going to try on Dadonov. They're going to try on Monahan. We'll see Joel Edmondson. It sounds like there's good injury news on him. Maybe there's still a chance he's moved before the deadline. But, whatever they do there, I do think that they've indicated to teams that, they're willing to be a third party banker as well. If the money lines up and if the situation works. And so, those teams are going to be pretty popular and pretty necessary, because all these capped out teams, whether the range of getting Patrick Kane, with a $10.5 million cap hit at full value, or even some of these smaller contracts that are going to move hands in the next 8 days, money is tight, cap room is tight. And, some of the teams that aren't buying, or at least can pick up some assets to help make these trades happen.
Anything else you want to bring up before we get to stick taps?
That's all I got for now. My head is swirling. I'll be honest. I've been on the phone most of the last couple of days, texting, calling, pestering, and I think I've emptied most of my notebook, at least the stuff I can share on the mic right now.
Okay, you can relax. You can lay down and
No.
take a breath.
No relaxing until March
5
4th,
minutes,
buddy.
Take a 5.
No relaxing until March 4th.
Okay. All right. Well, it's time for stick taps anyway. Should I go first? Do you want to go first?
You should. I actually forgot it was Thursday. I didn't even prepare a stick tap, so I'm scrambling already.
It's okay. It's okay. Anyway, for mine, I'm just gonna say to the fans at Mullet Arena in Arizona yesterday, I give them a stick tap. Yesterday was the very first time I got to watch a game at the arena. And it was kind of cool. Like, it's clearly like a novelty kind of thing. Like, this is something that we can look back in a few years and be like, hey, do you remember that time Arizona played in a 5,000 seat arena? But like, I enjoyed the experience. Like, it's a very sleek looking arena. There's definitely some quirks to it. Like, I find it really weird that, like, if you're doing media availabilities and you're going from the arena into the locker room, you have to like walk down this hallway, then go outside and then go back inside. But like, the media row where you're pretty much on top of the fans, I was worried about it at first, but like in a really good game, when the pace is going back and forth, just like that Arizona Flames game the other night, just getting to kind of be so close to the fans and feel all their emotions, like that almost makes it worth it. It's not a perfect arena. There's some things about it that are really weird, but I'm glad I had the experience of going to cover that game, because it was cool. I can say I've been to Mullet Arena. So shout out to all the fans. Shout out to all the people who enjoyed that Flames Coyotes game the other night.
Well, mark my words, this is one of my hottest takes, but I think in our lifetime, we're going to see Arizona become a destination for NHL players. I think with a new arena,
my mic is catching fire. Jeez.
With a new arena, with the ownership team they have in place there, with all these draft picks that they've stockpiled, at some point leading to a better team, with favorable tax situation, with the weather, I think it becomes like what we've seen in Tampa. I'm old enough to remember when the Lightning were a joke in the league. They were a punchline. They had crappy ownership. At one point, they played in a baseball stadium. They just didn't have a lot of fan support. And now it's the creme de la creme of the NHL. Similarly, Nashville was once a punching bag. Now it's a top 5 stop, as a road city to go visit. I think a lot of players love playing there. I see that in Arizona's future, and I know your jokes. I know the history. I've experienced a lot of that history. I was in the courtroom when they were doing those bankruptcy filings back in the day with Jim Balsillie. But anyway, that's my hot take. And just a quick one, I will give my stick tap to the Twitter followers of mine who've helped determine my Trade Center lunch. Julian, I took
Yes.
your advice. I put it out to the will of the people. We had several thousand people vote in the poll. And it appears that I'm going to have the chicken souvlaki on Trade Center on Friday. So I've put my order in with the staff at TSN, and I'm looking forward to a good lunch that day and a great deadline day in general.
I was hoping for pulled beef with kettle chips, but you know what? At the end of the day, it's not my stomach. It's your stomach.
Yeah. I mean, pulled beef might be a bit of aggressive too, because, without getting into details, we're kind of like tied into the set for like the whole day. So,
yeah,
you gotta choose wisely.
Okay, I'll let you get back to your phone, Siege. Thank you for emptying your notebook for all of us on the latest edition of the Chris Johnston Show. Please, if you're listening to the show and you're on Twitter or on Discord, get your questions in for our Monday show because, of course, it's Ask CJ Monday. So get those in. Just use the hashtag Ask CJ, and we'll try to get to your question. As so long as CJ is not passed out from fatigue by then.
Oh no, I'm still feeling strong, bud, but it's you got to power to the finish, and we'll see. Maybe there's a bonus weekend episode. We'll see what develops here in the next days. I know you're on the road in Vegas right now following the Flames. Producer Nick's busy, so we'll see if we can pull something together and if the news warrants. And if not, we'll see you Monday.
Hey, I lugged my podcast equipment around for a reason. So if we do have a surprise episode, I will be ready for it.
Love that. We'll do our best, and we want to give the people all the content they need.
For CJ, I'm Julian. So long, and stay tuned. You never know when a bonus episode of the Chris Johnston Show might drop onto your Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction. Wanna bet?
Inside the Game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.